The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
And we are back to another edition of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but we have a real cool show lined up for everyone tonight. As always, if you enjoy the topics I cover on this program, make sure you click subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. For those listening to the audio version of the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you haven't already. It's very much appreciated, and it really does help the channel. Real quick, I wanted to let you know that there's a new analysis video posted. In the previous video, we covered the Yemen UAP, and in the latest episode, we take a look at the mystery surrounding the Buga sphere found in Colombia. Is it an ancient human artifact, an elaborate hoax, or alien tech? Be sure to check it out and let me know your thoughts. Now then, joining me tonight is Len Filppu, who witnessed an extraordinary multi-witness UFO event that took place on August 1st, 1967, and filmmaker Matthew Salton, whose animated documentary, Psychedelic in the Sky, featured on the curated film platform Short of the Week, explores how encounters like this challenge our understanding of reality itself. We'll explore what happened that night in the late summer of 1967. What was it about Len's sighting that inspired Matthew to make this film, and how that experience has shaped Len's life ever since? We have a lot to cover tonight, so let's go right to the moment that started it all. Len, before we get into theories, take us back to that night in 1967. What did you see?
The thing that happened was I left my parents' home the evening of August 1st, 1967, telling them that I was going to look for flying saucers because I was going to sleep over with a bunch of buddies up at their house. And at about 2 a.m., a large orange fireball emitting flames appeared over the edge of the garage, and it was moving silently, slowly, absolutely horizontally with the horizon. It was about the size of a full moon. Take a full moon and bring it down to about 250 feet. It was very nearby, maybe about 30 yards away. And it was just an incredible sight. I woke everybody up. They saw it. Some didn't see it too well. I think they were sleeping. And there was a little white orb, like a star-like object, following in its trail, erratically moving as though it was trying to get back inside the ship. I immediately thought, oh, this was some kind of a UFO that had a problem. It was on fire, and it was trying to figure out what to do. It looked as though there was a something solid underneath the almost plasmatic orange glow around it, and underneath the flames that came out that went horizontally alongside the object. And it looked to be like larger in front and slightly tapering off toward the end, like an acorn or maybe an egg shape that was wider and larger in the front and smaller in the back. It seemed like it was screaming, "We're not from here. This is different." It was as though it came from a different dimension. It did not belong in ordinary, normal, everyday reality as I knew it. And I'd looked through telescopes. I'd slept out a lot in Boy Scouts and studied the universe and seen planetariums and did as much observation of the night sky as possible. And it just appeared and seemed to say, here we are. And it's forever changed me.
That's really mind-blowing. When people hear UFO sighting, they usually picture a light in the sky. What made you instantly feel this was something not from here?
Well, it wasn't a light in the sky. It was like an orange sphere burning with flames, like flames you'd find in a campfire, going really slowly. It wasn't a meteorite. It wasn't anything like that. It was going horizontally, completely silent. It just didn't fit in my usual perception of nature.
Matthew, let me come to you. When you first heard Len describe this, what struck you the most about his account?
I first heard Len's story at Contact in the Desert outside Palm Springs a few years ago. There were these experiencer sessions. I'm not an experiencer myself, but I was kind of interested in hearing from people and meeting people. I would say, quite honestly, Len's experience, was kind of a straightforward UFO sighting in a way. Len seemed like a very nice guy. And when I had talked to someone else, they had mentioned, Len, oh yeah, he's great. But there's a lot more to his story than just the sighting. He's had other experiences that he can't explain that may or may not be connected, to that original sighting. And that piqued my interest. That's why I went up and introduced myself to Len and was interested in learning more. And yeah, I think that was kind of one of the main drivers, is trying to piece together, because that was my interest in the UFO subject. Was I grew up with the X-Files and Unsolved Mysteries, and I had kind of a basic idea of what I thought a UFO was. But when I went down the rabbit hole, as they say, started reading a lot of the UFO literature, my mind was expanded in terms of what this could be or what this topic consisted of. So that was something, when I decided to make a film, I kind of wanted to tap into, as something I didn't see as much in the UFO world or in films or documentaries about UFOs, was kind of this unexplainable consciousness, spiritual aspect of the UFO phenomenon. Also, the fact that Len's sighting, there's newspapers, other people saw it in the town of Brockport. There's newspaper clippings describing the scene. But being able to use that material in the movie also gave it some more evidence for an audience to see and see with their own eyes,
Len, let me come back to you. You've said it felt like it came from another dimension. What did that feel like at the moment? Was it fear, awe, confusion?
I don't want to be taken too literally when I say dimension. It just seemed to come from a different reality. It was not part of our everyday reality. I was exhilarated. I was in awe. I made sure to wake everyone else up so that they could take a look, and we stared at it for a while. I never felt threatened. In fact, I almost felt some sort of a communion with it, to tell you the truth, which I didn't talk about for years and years. And it has remained that way ever since, because I had been the UFO nut in my group. This is 1967. This was before a lot of widespread UFO news, magazines, books, movies, etc. Plus, it appears that there was a full court, press, government activity going on to try to shed skepticism on the entire area, to keep the lid on the story. So there was a lot of ridicule and a lot of laughter in those days.
Was that happening in Brockport? You felt at the time that kind of trying to shut down the story?
Well, it wasn't so much that there was any effort that came into Brockport to try to shut it down. No, but there was a general sense in the United States that anyone who believed in this or saw this was a crackpot, tinfoil hat wearing nut, and just stay away from them. And my friends, with whom I, did very well in school, very well in athletics, very well socially, if I started talking about UFOs, they'd say, "Oh, okay, cuckoo," and they'd walk the other way. Same thing happened to my buddies who saw it. So it was just not a fertile ground for talking about UFOs back in those days.
You also described a white orb following behind the larger object. What about that detail has stayed with you all these years?
Well, that's a great question, Frank. And it's a significant detail in my story. I always, when I talk to people, I talked about the little white orb, and it seemed like it was like maybe a smaller reconnaissance craft. This was in my mind at the time, that had been left behind, that the mothership got in trouble and they had to leave the reconnaissance ship, and it was trying to get back in. Hey, don't leave me, don't fly away, kind of a thing. And I told the story, including that tidbit, to my dad, who was a professor at the local college of economics, and he had served in World War II in counterintelligence. And he nodded his head and said, good story, thank you, all that. Then later that summer, I was going through some old newspaper clippings, and I found a clip I hadn't seen. And in that, there were witnesses who testified in the article the reporter wrote about the little white orb following in its trail. It was the only news story I saw about that. I showed it to my dad, and he read it, and he looked up slowly, looked me in the eye, and said, "Now I believe you." And it was dramatic because I actually thought he believed me before. So yes, there was a little white orb following it. It would be behind it, then it would go over to the right side and then come back and then move over and go up to the left, as though it was trying to scout, what was going on, what was wrong because of the flames coming off this orb. So I thought maybe it was some kind of that they were connected in some way, and that it was trying to help or try to figure out what was going on, or trying to get back in the mothership. And it followed it from Brockport, and it looked the same way in Geneseo, New York, which is probably 35 miles away. And I don't know. I do not know what it was.
That's fascinating, because from the way you're describing it, it almost sounds like it was under some form of intelligent control. Another aspect of this UFO sighting that to me adds credibility is that more than 30 people saw it. Does that make it easier or harder to process what happened?
Well, I think it makes it easier. It was in the newspapers right away afterwards. There were 2 Brockport police officers who not only saw it, but they reported it. And a lot of times people wouldn't report these things. They'd see something and they wouldn't report it, especially, trained observers. And there were 2 Monroe County sheriffs who saw it and reported it. There were a number of people out at one of the Brockport State College campuses, a vice president of the college. So there were a number of people. Frank, I don't want to complicate the story, but 4 hours earlier that evening, there was a guy named Sidney Zipkin in nearby Churchville, New York, which is about 5 miles from Brockport, who claimed that he saw a UFO landed in the park that he was guarding. He saw 2 small aliens in shiny black uniforms scamper back into the craft when his headlights hit them. The craft took off and disappeared. So when the Brockport UFO was seen 4 hours later and began to filter into the newspapers, the Sidney Zipkin seeing little aliens running around a park nearby was the news item that took all of the ink. Much of the fascination with that story got thrown into the Sidney Zipkin side of it. There is one other thing, though. There was an organization called NICAP. I think it was the National Investigating Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. And they were the MUFON of the day. They were the ones trying to investigate these. They investigated the Brockport UFO and said there were enough witnesses, and it acted, in such a manner that they considered that a true UFO, a verified UFO. NICAP said about the Sidney Zipkin thing, because there wasn't enough evidence and because of the nature of seeing the aliens and whatnot, that they were not able to have an opinion on that, and they could not call it an official UFO per their lingo and investigation back in the day.
That's powerful, especially hearing how that moment stayed with you. And real quick, for the folks listening, if this is your kind of late night conversation, consider subscribing and leaving a comment. It's a great way to support the channel, and it helps keep these conversations going. Len, before I bring Matthew back in, did you ever feel chosen, or were you simply in the right place at the right time?
At that time, I felt as though they may have, whatever intelligence was controlling the aircraft and the way the events unfolded, that they may have somehow connected with my thinking, realized that I was a fan, realized that I completely believed that there were probably other life elsewhere in this universe, and said, let's give this guy a break. Let's give him a flyby and let him know we're real. And that's all I thought. So I don't really know, but it's one of those questions that has stayed with me throughout my life. I was 16 years old at the time, and I'm much older than that. It's no longer 1967, and I'm not playing basketball and football anymore, but it has stayed with me. And as I get closer and closer to the reality of mortality in my life, I do feel a need to try to square the deal and let people know about it.
That makes sense. I can see why that would stick with you. Matthew, from a storytelling point of view, what makes a case like this different from the typical UFO report?
Yeah, I would say Len was honest, in the way he told his story, kind of alluding to that, isn't that odd? I was into UFOs, and then I saw one. What if they were saying something to me? What if they were conscious of the fact that I had been thinking about them? Those kind of questions I thought were interesting to kind of dive deeper into or explore visually in an animation, because it's something Len can't really explain either. And kind of going there, trying to piece that together into the story. I mean, talking about a light in the sky is one thing, but then make that sense in a story for an audience. It was a challenge, and I was going after a challenge with this, trying to make something that had been made before, taking a perspective that hadn't been seen before through the documentary or film medium.
If I may continue on that line of thought, you've said that UFO films felt like a bridge too far before this. What made Len's story different?
Len's questioning everything, Some of the people I met at the conference, they kind of have an agenda or something that they really want to bring home. And I don't know, I think Len's curiosity and the way he told his story, I felt drawn, to tell that story.
And why use animation instead of traditional documentary footage? What can animation express that video can't?
I would say I tried to kind of lean into the psychedelic aspect with animation. So when Len is talking about seeing the light in the sky and kind of being enamored with it, in the film, that's kind of a breaking point, I'd say, where we kind of zoom into his eye and are seeing kind of the large orange dance on the screen with the different shapes, and kind of going more into the interior or something, kind of suggesting what's happening inside the mind, rather than just showing kind of from the outside. Later in the film, there's the Zipkin story, and that's more of a straightforward drawing of what Zipkin looked like, but having moments for abstractions in the film, that was something important to me. And kind of having those interior monologue that Len describes, being able to visualize that. You'd have a hard time doing that with just a typical documentary or using, video.
One of the things I found interesting while watching your documentary was that you grew up believing in extraterrestrial life through your parents' faith, but later became skeptical of UFOs. Did working on this film shift your worldview at all?
Yeah, well, I've definitely spent a lot of time thinking about it and working on this. And I would say, I'm more open than before. And during COVID, I really got into the work at Jacques Vallée and was reading a lot of literature. And, some of these stories are so out there. I don't know if I accept everything or can't say I believe every story, but I mean, when you read enough stories, it starts to shift your worldview and entertain the possibility of it. And I was going to bed at night thinking, oh my God, are there creatures out there meditating, if something appears in front of me? I don't know. You're just having these crazy thoughts like, do we live in a world where this is really happening? Because it doesn't feel so safe anymore. And I was kind of recognizing that I was shifting my worldview, and in a way it was my spirituality, my belief system was changing, even though I had been more skeptical in the past. And so, making this was an act of faith, or I was acting out on my impulses, on my belief system. in creating this, feeling like I had to make a film. If I was going to make a movie, it had to be on UFOs.
The title of the documentary is Psychedelic in the Sky. And in recent years, researchers like Dr. Rick Strassman, who studied DMT in the 1990s, have pointed out striking similarities between UFO encounters and reports from people in altered states of consciousness. Encounters with beings, feelings of oneness, and lasting shifts in worldview. This next question is for you both. When you hear those parallels, do they feel meaningful to you? Or do you see UFO experiences as something fundamentally different?
I have a feeling, Frank, that a lot of this is all connected. In one of our conversations with Matthew, I mentioned that the UFO I saw was like a psychedelic in the sky because it began to change my worldview and my consciousness. And I've had subsequent experiences that have continued to move me farther away from our shared common understanding of reality and more toward a view of consciousness as a more primal, fundamental force in the universe. Now, imagine if there was some group that was looking at Earth and how humans are behaving and trying to get us as the human race to stop killing one another and keep the planet alive and change our behavior. I think that the way that they might consider doing it would be to begin to change the consciousness of people, make them more aware that there are other things in your reality. It isn't just devoted to the limits of your senses and awareness. And I think they might try to open up people's eyes, and then more people would follow or begin to look at it. Now, I don't know if this is happening. I really am exploring this because I don't have answers and I'm trying to figure out answers. But for me, it is absolutely about consciousness. All of these events have changed my way of looking at the world, and it allowed me, when I really needed to take a plunge into a more spiritually based life, that I was able to do that. It gave me permission to give that a shot, and it has proven to be extremely beneficial, positive, and fulfilling in my life.
Yeah, I would say the researchers and people that are very familiar with the UFO experience, they say that consciousness is kind of the next level of understanding UFOs, because people who have had experiences, like Len, they report during or after like kind of a shift in consciousness. That's another big part of the UFO world. And in terms of the title of the film, Len had mentioned, it was like a psychedelic in the sky. He may have been referencing Rick Strassman or one of these researchers. Kind of, it can shift someone's consciousness. The people aren't the same, after they experience that. And kind of with psychedelics, they shift your consciousness for a little bit. And you didn't realize that was a state of mind that existed on this planet. And I actually kind of was not wanting to use the title Psychedelic in the Sky. It kind of used it as a placeholder. I had made 2 previous films about psychedelics and drugs, and I thought, okay, I'm doing something different now. I'm doing a movie on UFOs. But in the end, I ended up titling it again, another Psychedelic in the Sky, like referencing psychedelics, because that's where I ended up. Didn't come up with a better title, so Psychedelic in the Sky it was.
In my opinion, given the parallels, it was quite a fitting title. Len, let's come back to you. You've described your encounter as consciousness expanding. How do you make sense of that without reducing it to psychology alone?
To put into words, I'm trying to put this into words, Frank, in some writing that I'm doing now. So I haven't completely processed it, but it was like a supreme coincidence, a spectacular torch-bearing, light in the sky synchronicity. At that time in my life, with the things that had happened to me, I had to pay attention to it. It was almost as though, and this sounds really wild, it was almost as though this thing was meant for me. Now, even back then, when I was a kid and egotistical teenager, I knew that, geez, you can't go there. No, that's ridiculous. How could this have happened? Yet over the years, I still have this sense that somehow they stumbled upon me, maybe picked up on that, I was amenable to seeing it and made a show. I just don't know, but it's that kind of connection. There was another incident while we were watching it. I was going to go in the house, find the phone, try to call a number. I didn't know who I was going to call. I didn't know what I was doing. And this feeling came over me. Stop. What are you doing? Turn around and go enjoy the view of this, which I did. I turned around. I forgot all about trying to report it and be a good Boy Scout and all the rest. And I just enjoyed it. There was just a sense, Frank, that they were saying, you've done a good job, Len. You've gone through a lot of ridicule. You've read a lot of the research. You've stuck with us and just wanted to let you know you're on the right path. And it just zoomed slowly by. And that's the feeling I got. So is that correct? Is that wrong? I don't know. It's very subjective, but that's where I think this stuff really hits you, is subjectively.
Let's talk about Jacques Vallée, who Matthew brought up moments ago. For those not familiar, Jacques Vallée is a scientist and UFO researcher whose work influenced the French scientist character Claude Lacombe in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, directed by Steven Spielberg. Vallée is known for approaching the phenomenon from a serious, cross-cultural research perspective, most notably in his 1969 book, Passport to Magonia, which has remained popular over the years among those interested in exploring the alien UFO mystery. From his research, Jacques Vallée suggests that UFOs might be something other than spacecraft, more like a consciousness phenomenon. Does that idea resonate with your experiences?
I do believe that it is about consciousness, about altering, changing human consciousness. And it may be that we see a variety of different kinds of objects, some that are more physical than others, as all part of the variety of these experiences. But I can only speak about me. All I'm trying to do is, to the best of my ability, share what happened with me. And for me, the long road of changing my consciousness for the better began with sighting this object.
Yeah, I think the thing for me when I read Jacques Vallée, that kind of the whole consciousness idea, was that there was a whole variety of experiences people have had, over history. He was kind of saying in different parts of the world, the beings they encounter look this way, but in this part of the world, they're like gnomes or elf-looking. But people see grays in North America, or some people see Jesus, or people like in a white flowing robe. And if these things happen to some of these people, that maybe there is a singular source of intelligence, or there could be multiple, but what people report back, after the fact, I think it's a compelling idea to kind of try to make sense of the real diversity and some of the absurdity of some of the cases over history. Len's case doesn't really fall into that kind of the absurd, because there was no being or anything. And I think that's something that I love about Jacques Vallée's work too, is he appreciates the sense of absurd and uses analogies like the Japanese koan as like symbolism, and what would communication look like from another intelligence. It may not be what we think it is, It may not be someone coming out and saying hello and take me to your leader. It might be a totally different way of experiencing and communicating. And that's where the consciousness aspect comes into.
For many people, their mental image of a UFO encounter comes from films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, mysterious lights, communication through symbols, a sense of awe, Do you think movies like that get closer to the emotional truth of encounters than the typical nuts and bolts spaceship narrative?
I think you see more stories kind of being told, kind of big Hollywood films, movies like Contact, that was written by Carl Sagan, and Arrival. They're kind of touching upon this like emotional aspect of encountering beings, and that it's much more complicated and they're not always here to destroy the world. That's kind of a barbaric, old way of talking about the stories. But I think people are thinking about their intelligent life in the universe. People are becoming more involved, and the storytelling is showing that. And I'm curious to see the next Spielberg movie, how he grapples the topic there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Spielberg was informed by some people who were paying close attention to what the latest information was on the UFOs. And as we go from War of the Worlds, kind of the battleground, into more of an understanding and a close encounters connection, and maybe even an area where the aliens or the intelligence is here to help humanity grow and evolve in a more peaceful way and save the planet. That's a major character arc that we're seeing. And I, too, am looking forward to the new Spielberg movie and to see where he takes us now. And I think some of the movies, people expect then to see things in the sky like they see in the movies, and that isn't always the case. So I urge people to pay attention to those who have experienced some of this stuff, so that you get all sides of the story covered.
I tend to agree. I find Spielberg's depiction of UFOs and alien contact in Close Encounters to be among the most grounded, if I may use the term. This next question is for you, Len. Have you ever regretted telling your story publicly?
Well, only one time, because I haven't really told it all that much publicly. I've just begun to venture out into the public a little bit more. And during the years after seeing the Brockport UFO, I shied away from it because the ridicule was just too much. I had to explain too much, and it just wasn't worth it. But decades later, after I'd retired, I decided I'd go to a UFO conference, and I was outside in a lobby, a big auditorium, and someone was giving a speech, and I was outside, and I mentioned to someone that, I saw a UFO. In fact, I went looking for UFOs that night, and all of a sudden, a small group of people gathered around, and I was just talking to one person quietly, and a small group of people somehow overheard this. A camera went on and a light shined in my eyes, and they started peppering me with questions, and I just backed out because I wasn't used to this. Usually, if I told people I saw a UFO, they'd run away from me, But here they were very interested. So I noticed what an interesting change there has been. One other thing, Frank, that if I may, just before we run out of time, I wanted to mention something. If anyone out there knows anything about the Brockport UFO or the UFO flap that was around that area, I would love to hear from you, because many of these podcasts that I've done, or a few of them that I've done, have generated people's memories, and they come forward on social media and they say, well, I saw something and my dad saw something and I remember that happening. In fact, there's a whole new adjunct to the Brockport UFO with something that happened in Holly, New York. Holly, New York is about 5 miles outside of Brockport. And a little bit later that summer, there was another person who was actually a friend of mine, and she only came forward a couple years ago, who experienced orange sphere. She was with 3 other people. I've interviewed 2 of them. We're trying to find out who the 4th person was, but there's a Holly, New York incident that happened sometime after high school had started in early fall of 1967. And if anyone has any further information about that, I'd love to hear about it. So these shows do a service for the entire field because it often shakes loose memories and it gets other people to remember something, and they might come forward, and that could really help to develop the story greater. And my friend's name is Patty Goodnow Murray, who I've interviewed extensively on this. And she saw the Holly UFO, and it's a really interesting story.
So you imagine so many more people saw it than reported it. Only 30 people reported it.
Absolutely, Matthew. In fact, I did not report it. My friends did not report it. So I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other people who saw it and may remember it and may want to provide some further details about it.
Matthew, did you worry people would dismiss the film just because it deals with UFOs?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that was kind of one of my trepidations of doing a UFO movie. And a lot of people will just dismiss it, immediately. And, I see that in my life, even with friends or other people. For some people, it makes a mark, and some people, they're just not ready, or it's not part of their world, and it doesn't hit them in a way that, you would think it would. For me, it's like, how can you not be interested in this? Like, this is fascinating. This topic is so ripe with so many questions and so many credible people, for decades telling their stories. And I wanted to kind of contribute to that record and get it out into the world as much as possible.
This next question is for you both, and it touches on what Matthew just mentioned. We're in a moment where military UAP footage and pilot encounters are being discussed in Congress and major media. Yet, personal experiencer accounts are still often dismissed. What does that contrast tell us about how people decide what is real or credible?
Well, I think that we're still guided by science, and we live in a material world. And I think that most people want some kind of proof that is picked up by the instrumentation, and the military is flying through the skies and has a lot of opportunity to see things. So I'm not surprised at all. I'm with Professor Jeffrey Kripal at Rice University. Let's get some of these anomalous experiences back on the table. Let's take a look at it by journalists, by scientists, by researchers, academics, and let's not throw things out because it doesn't fit into some kind of a mold that we think it ought to, because it defies it. It is opening our view of what reality is. And I think that we need to hesitate before we come to conclusions about this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just going to take time for people to open up more. But I'd say for the masses and for people who don't think about this topic, they're going to need someone at a podium, with a suit on, who holds an office, thinking about it and clearly stating it, to get the major media, the mainstream media, to pay attention to it. Hopefully when that breaks, then people will move on and start listening to more experiencer stories and people who have really compelling stories to tell we can learn from.
True. It's interesting that even with congressional hearings and Pentagon acknowledgments, the broader cultural impact hasn't been what many expected. We're running out of time, and I would like to get through a few more questions quickly, if I may. This one is also for you both. If someone watching has had an experience but is afraid to talk about it, what would you say to them?
Well, I think that there are a number of experiencer groups out there that allow one to maintain their anonymity, and they can talk to people who have experienced anomalous activities and also wanted to maintain their privacy. So you'll find like-minded people, and that may really help you to unload some of your thinking and to begin the process of processing this reality. You don't have to go public or start blasting social media. You can do it on a quiet basis and just put your toe in the water and see how it is. I know that the experiencer group in New York City is an excellent place to start that process.
Yeah, I would say talk to people and find other people who may have had similar experiences, maybe by going to a UFO conference or meeting people online.
Thank you for that answer. Last question again for you both. In one sentence, what do you think people misunderstand the most about UFO experiences?
I would say that what's misunderstood the most is that people expect everyone to have a similar pattern-like experience. And my sense is that there is a wide variety of all kinds of different experiences, including anomalous experiences, that all fall into a similar category. So it's not just one answer. And those people who have a different answer, they're not making things up. That's probably part of the phenomenon itself, is that there's a wide variety of experiences.
Yeah, and I would say, a lot of people who do talk about their experiences, they don't always tell their full story. There's usually more there, but like Len said, there's all types of experiences and there's other aspects to the phenomena that may be connected.
Yeah, I would have to agree. From my years studying the UFO phenomenon, it seems these experiences do not follow a single formula. Len, Matthew, sadly, we've run out of time. But before I let you both go, can you tell people who want to explore this further, where is the best place for them to watch Psychedelic in the Sky?
It's on YouTube, it's on Vimeo, it's on my website, MatthewSalton.com. If you type in Matthew Salton or Psychedelic in the Sky in Google, it'll be one of the first results. Yeah, streaming on multiple places online.
Got it. For the folks out there who want to keep up with your latest projects, share a similar experience with you, or maybe they remember the Brockport UFO sighting, where can they find you?
You can find me at MatthewSalton.com. I'm also on Instagram at Matthew R. Salton. And, I post usually what I'm up to and what I'm working on there.
Well, they can look around, and I have a pretty low profile. I'm not like a clearinghouse of information on this. For those of you who want to read a little bit more about my experience and some of the anomalous experiences, you should take a look at the last 2 chapters of Diana Pasulka's book, Encounters, and you'll find that information there. I'm open to conversations, but I'm busy working on writing my own book.
Thank you both for taking the time. I really enjoyed talking to you both. Please keep me posted on what you're working on next. I would love to have you both back.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Frank. Greatly appreciate it. It was a wonderful chat. Matthew, always good to see you. I urge people to go check out his film. It isn't just about Len by any means. It's about Matthew's search and journey in understanding this. It's a really, really good, entertaining movie.
It's nice, Len. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure and always fun chatting with Len. Thank you, Frank, for having me.
That was Matthew Salton and Len Filppu of the animated documentary short Psychedelic in the Sky, out now on YouTube, Vimeo, and Matthew's website, MatthewSalton.com. Links will be in the description. As always, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share if you're watching on YouTube. For those listening via Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or one of the many other audio platforms, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really does help the channel. All that being said, take care, be safe, God bless. Don't do anything too crazy. We want to see you back next time. And until then, bye-bye.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.